just like physical illness, mental illness can be overcome. We just got to inspire people to believe that.
The mental health community and the firearms industry spent way too much time running parallel to each other without communicating. It's time we change the narrative and destroy the stigma that we both face.
Walk the Talk America presents Guns and Mental Health, a podcast for firearms owners, clinicians, and the curious public. It's podcast time. Hello, gentlemen. I'm Jake Wiskerchen. I'm joined by Dr. D.B. Palmer, merely Eddie Davenport, 10-time national champion, and musician Brandon Covey. And we are the clinicians of Walk the Talk America, and we are super excited to be doing this podcast in a slightly different form now. Maybe or maybe not, Mike will be jumping on. It's like 7 a.m. here in the Pacific time zone. It's a Friday. Mike has been moving into a new home, so I don't know if he's going to jump in, but if he does, we will welcome him with open arms. But this is the first of our adjusted new series on guns and mental health, where clinician firearms owners are going to be talking about clinical stuff. So good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Everybody's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I love it. I was joking earlier that 6 a.m. isn't so bad unless you go to bed at 1:15 a.m., which is what I did. I have a friend in town, and we were up late smoking cigars and solving the world's problems. So it's always nice to have one of your best friends in town. And during the course of the conversation, he said he asked a lot of questions about my world. He works in politics. He's retired from the Marine Corps. He's a lieutenant colonel when he got out, and now he's doing some consulting for a think tank. And great guy. I've known him since third grade. And he was asking things like, how do you work with people who have different ideologies? And what do you think about mental illness as a construct in a religion framework? Stuff like that. It was really cool. It was a great conversation. But one of the things that stood out to me is he said, do you as a clinician go to counseling? And I said, honestly, no, I have before. I went to couples counseling with my wife. I've been in counseling, but these days, no, I don't. And I have my reasons for that, and I'll share them. But I want to go around the horn real quick and get your guys' take on that particular topic. Like, as practitioners, where do you stand on the whole, you should also be on the couch mentality that a lot of our professors, I think, tell us that we should do, but do you? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I can start. I have in the past. It really depends. A lot of the work I do, like Brandon, I think, mentioned in the introduction episode that he does a lot of work with trauma. And if I feel things are backing up, I will go. But over the years, I've learned a lot of good self-care techniques where I can, relieve that stress and kind of leave it at the office and not take it home with me. There's different things I do. For example, my work cell phone isn't allowed in my house. It stays in my work car. My work computer is not allowed to ever come in the house. I do not work from home. I thought it would be a good thing to do, but I've learned, well, I can't say I do not work from home because I've done it sometimes. But even when I'm done for the day, that work computer now goes out to my car. And my work aspect is not allowed to stay in my house. So I make a clear separation of things. And I like I said, I have in the past. It's not. I don't have a problem for people who do it. I also think not everyone needs to. And at the same time, like if you have a good supervisor or something like that, you kind of already do that because you're staffing the cases, you're relieving the pressure off yourself. And I mean, if you have your own personal things going on, by all means, reach out and talk to someone because while we're all therapists and we can therapize ourselves, sometimes it's good to have a differing opinion.
Brandon, what do you think?
Yeah, so right now I am seeing a counselor. It started. Well, I guess first off, I feel like when it's time for counseling is when you feel like whatever, issues or struggling that you're having, I feel like it's when it starts to impact your ability to function on a daily basis. Like if it starts to impact your relationship, if it's impacting your job, if it's impacting your ability to, just like live your life the way you want to live it. I feel like that's the time that you want to get in counseling. And, I've been, I'm a pretty open book about it. I've struggled with anxiety for most of my life. So I've been in counseling on and off, whenever I feel that my anxiety starts to really impact, and it's mainly my work that it starts to impact just because, working with people on anxiety, being that that's one of my specialties, sometimes it can be a little bit triggering for me. So I found it helpful to talk to my counselor about that. But, right now we're doing like a once a month type of thing. And I'm at the point now where I'm, got pretty good control of it and think I'm able to get out again. But I say typically when I do, it's usually like starts out every other week, then it turns into every month or so. And then after that, just kind of trickles out. But again, just kind of when it starts to impact my work and other areas of my life is where I feel like it's beneficial.
You're touching on something that we get trained in school, and it's a concept called countertransference. And we'll get more into that. But the general idea is that transference is when the patient or the client sees something in the clinician that reminds them of themselves, and it can be obstructive to the process in the room. Countertransference is when we do it to the patient, right? So you mentioned working with people who have anxiety, kind of tickles your own anxiety, and it brings it up, which no surprise probably why you like working with people who have anxiety and panic disorders, because you're very familiar with it. But that's something to be aware of. It's not that we can eliminate it altogether. Certainly sometimes people walk in and they remind us of people from our past or whatever, but what we want to do is just be aware of it so it doesn't become interfering and obstructive. So I'm really glad you touched on that. It's a neat concept that I think the world needs to know about, because it improves communication so much. DB, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, great points, particularly on I'll just tag on the countertransference as well, because it's also a powerful ally in the relationship, as long as you can recognize where those limits are. And so, yeah, any two people are going to have some kind of connection, even if they've never met. We're going to put each other in roles. We're going to put each other in some kind of construct. So the degree to which we can own that we're doing that, and that does exist, then we can navigate it much better. So to the question of counseling, yeah, I think for all grad programs, all the faculty will say, you need to be in counseling, or we'll straight up require it, and we'll at least do a couple of check-ins that the clinician, whoever's seeing you, at least will verify that you've done that, or kind of check that box. I guess my point to that would be that counseling is much, much bigger than mental health counseling. And so I think it's really important to seek counsel, and that varies onto where you are in each chapter of life. So there are times when, for me, I would, kind of the student phase and post grad, when I was required to, and so yeah, I was there. And then others were like now, where I'm far more focused on, where are the areas where I'm notably weak? What are the areas where I really need to build skills? And for me, it's in other areas right now. And so so getting really, really grounded in the places where I really am noticing that I want to learn, and of course where other people are saying, like, hey, is this normal for you? So that's also helpful when, my wife or others will say, uh, what's up? Great indicator, because they've just put it in front of me. I guess to that though, I think we talked about so many of these things within military community and others, of the other ways of engaging health. And so for me, I've been a strong advocate for exercise, for getting outdoors and into wild places, spending a lot of time in the backcountry, and to farming, getting my hands into the earth and working through that. And so while I'm not in formal mental health counseling currently, and haven't been for a good amount of time, very much engaged in kind of nature RX, and kind of exercise RX, or prescriptions, and being really, really hands-on with balancing, just as Brandon said, the weight of the work that we do. I mean, everybody's job takes a toll on them, every job, and certainly it's the case for ours as well.
I agree with all that, and I think that the idea of holistic treatment is very important, and it doesn't have to take one particular form. And I said, sort of tongue in cheek, and I say it frequently, like, I want to work myself out of a job, but I said tongue in cheek that, humanity in its current form didn't just get here overnight, and it managed to get here without us helping it along. So while we serve a role, there's always been the shaman, there's always been the medicine man, there's always been the village doctor or whatever. With the person with the more specialized skill set certainly can be useful, and so we don't want to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. But simultaneously, if I'm going to be authentic and I want to be consistent across all interfaces, I want to try to model for people what I'm trying to preach, which is I need to lean in to my community. And the way that you do that is you have to have a community. So a lot of what I do with emotional functioning is teaching people the awareness of their emotions so that they can become vulnerable, and through vulnerability, intimate with other humans. So recently I was going through a pretty tough time, series of struggles in the last several months. And under any other circumstance, I would say, yeah, you might want to go talk to somebody professionally about that. But I think I had the self-awareness enough to lean on my friends and colleagues. And of course, I'm fortunate enough to be in this profession and surrounded by so many brilliant people. You don't have to be licensed independent or be a supervisor or have special letters after your name, but just a professional colleague to get a different opinion or different perspective is useful. So I get a lot of that in the hallway at my job, which is really neat. And I'm very fortunate for that. But also my friends and family who are non-clinical can also be useful in pointing out blind spots and offering insights and wisdom and direction. So I am trying to work myself out of a job in my own life, and that's why I'm a little hesitant to go make another appointment, mostly because I don't want to have to retell my story again. So I'm going to go to the people who know me the best and see what their reflections are on why I'm struggling. And lacking that, if people really are empty-handed and they come up with no answers, then yeah, absolutely, I'd go make an appointment with a professional colleague. So that's kind of my intentionality behind it. So I certainly wouldn't tell anybody not to. I mean, I believe in this profession. I believe it's useful. And like any other profession, if you can't fix it yourself, go hire somebody who does it for a living. I certainly do that with my fence in my backyard and and my cars, because I'm not going to fix those things myself. So if I can't fix my own noggin, yeah, I'm gonna hire a professional, somebody who's well trained. I just happen to be fortunate enough to be surrounded by them. And I'm guessing that auto mechanics probably don't go to the mechanic shop. They just lean on their mechanic friends, right? So I think that's kind of cool. And it's just a little nuance to our profession. I think we get trained that we're not allowed to do that, right? We get taught in grads of school, like, don't treat without consent. And I think there's some people out there who will hear what we're saying and say, well, you're asking people to treat you without consent. It's like, yeah, or I'm just asking them to be, sharp human beings with a special skill set. So DB, I didn't know you were in the military. What branch?
Yeah, I was in the Army National Guard. Gosh, a lifetime ago it seems. So yeah, long time ago.
You find yourself drawing people to you from the military background?
I do, so it's both military, I think, and then the kind of the outdoor world. So I think for a lot of military guys and gals getting out, something that we've all connected on is enjoying the grind. And so when the military is no longer part of a person's daily life or part of their cluster, it still is, and a lot of that is around the work, the effort, the mission, and the expeditions that I've been leading over years, and has been something that approximates that. And I guess for a lot of us, remove some of the administrative tedium and all the other frustrating parts that may have been maybe all of our military stories, and just engages us into something that we can actually be the driver of. But it's a push. So yeah, I would, maybe the shorter answer is, I think yes, absolutely. A lot of people reach out for that purpose, at least like the gun community, so you can at least speak the language. They have a sense that, like, okay, this guy reasonably is probably going to get some of this. So yeah.
I think it's important, and that's what we're trying to do here, is to invite firearms owners into counseling without fear of rights restriction. And that's why we're doing this, to say, hey, there's at least 4 trustworthy individuals in this room. Well, we got 4 different rooms, but on this show, there are probably others, right? And we want to invite more clinicians to step into that space and advertise that they are competent in this realm too, just the same as you would any other demographic with which you're very competent. So I think a format that we want to do for the show is we want to bring a topic or multiple topics to discuss. And Brandon and I were texting the other day. He asked me about an article on or articles or research on what we would call imposter syndrome. And we had a fun back and forth about that. But I'm going to kick it over to you. Take the floor, if you would, Brandon. Tee that up. I want to talk about this quote unquote imposter syndrome thing, and what it is and why we think it's important to address, and why now? Like, what, we didn't hear about this 10 years ago, or at least I didn't. Now it's a big thing. So I'm going to hand the conch over to you, and you can can lead us through this.
Sure. Yeah. So imposter syndrome is, essentially when you're in some sort of a profession or in some sort of like a role of leadership, you start to doubt your own, competence. And it's like a fear of being, put on blast or, kind of called out as a phony, essentially. And, I know there's like a name for it right now, and that's something that we were talking about. There's been the name that's been labeled imposter syndrome, and I couldn't tell you when that came out or who gave that name, but essentially what it is just a matter of insecurity from what I can tell. And the reason, I was asking you about, articles for imposter syndrome, and it kind of goes back into, your first question about, if we're in counseling, a lot of times, when I'm working with, anxiety, since I still struggle with anxiety from time to time, I kind of wonder myself, like, okay, like, am I the right person to be, talking to these clients and things like that? So, and I know, I am, and I'm able to challenge those thoughts and, get myself through that. But, I was wondering if there was anything, as far as ways that you can kind of combat that. And what I have found myself is just really a matter of challenging those thoughts and, kind of getting in touch with what your insecurities are and, knowing, why you feel the way you feel.
Feel free to jump in, guys, and share your own stories. I think a big part of what we would like to accomplish here is that if we can share with transparency some of our struggles and the stuff that either we continue to struggle with, which is fine, that's part of being a human. We just don't want our struggles to be life interfering, or stuff that we've overcome. I think it'll be an open invitation for other people to be honest about what they're dealing with. So jump in. Have you guys ever experienced this self-doubt, professionally or otherwise?
My very first company that I worked for after graduating grad school was not the one I'm currently working with, but it had me working with a lot of younger children. And when I say younger, like probably age 3 to 9, and doing intensive in-home. And I learned very quickly that I don't like working with very young children. Nothing against them. It's just not in my wheelhouse. I'm not a play therapist. I definitely questioned a lot of, did I just waste the last 5 years of my life? I'm not seeing any results of these kids. The families are incredibly tough. The with kids like with children and stuff like that, it's a lot of inflections and a lot of behaviors, and not so much as the traditional psychotherapy that like we may be used to with an older teenager or an adult or something. And not to say like behaviors doesn't fly into those categories at all, but with children, they can't articulate, hey, today I'm feeling mad because they are going to be breaking their toy and screaming because something's going on. If you're a parent, you obviously know this. But it was definitely a lot of asking myself, like, did I go into the right career? Did I do something? Then when I started getting some more of their older kids in this stuff, again, you have, and my current boss likes to say that I'm very good at putting out fires. And I think it's because I drove through I trekked through this time period where I questioned myself and I salt back and I asked advice like, hey, I'm not seeing any results here. I'm not really seeing like good, strong, like growth in my client. And I feel like I'm just a waste of space and a waste of time. And these are just natural thoughts that go through your head. And like, you think about it, I switched careers. I went through 5 years of school, like 4 years undergrad, 1 year to grad school because grades and stuff. But the grades isn't a good thing. I was able to skip a year of grad school, but it's still the whole time period of like, what am I doing with my life? This is bad. Like I'm a bad clinician. I'm not helping these kids. Like I'm a waste of space. And this is, I think, just a natural thought that pops through your head when you're first starting out. And then it doesn't even have to be when you're first starting out. I definitely have days that I work with some of my clients now that like uh I do student threat assessments for one of the counties near me. And a lot of it is, trying to see if a kid, where they are on the community, like, individual to school shooter pipeline, the community, someone willing to do acts of community violence. And I definitely have interviewed some kids that they were going to be a school shooter or they were on the process of doing it. And we stopped them with police and we intervened. That didn't make the news because we stopped them before they killed someone. And I definitely have questioned myself, like, am I doing the right things? And like, what I'm doing is serious. If this is life and death, my recommendations will lead to either this kid's life being put on a track to jail, versus if I don't intervene, this kid can possibly kill people. It's definitely thoughts that pop through your head.
Yeah, big things. I think the core of imposter syndrome, as we mentioned from the outset, is that, for example, if you're studying for a profession or a license credential or whatever it is, just one day all of a sudden you have it, and so you've spent all this time in preparation. You've looked at this thing down the road as a future. I want to do this, and then one day you have the title, and the title does not make competency, nor does it bring along that feeling of I'm ready for it. I'm the guy. I'm the gal for this. That takes time, and I think for those that don't have some sense of imposter syndrome in these kind of big things, I think that's more concerning than the imposter syndrome. I think if you feel like, yeah, I got this, I know what I'm doing, and I'm ready to spread my counsel to anyone who will sit with me, I think that's an unsafe clinician to trust with big things. I think they're probably less consequential things in life. But if you don't have a sense of pause for the gravity of what's going on, I mean, so many examples of that. I mean, think the first time you hold a firearm, that's a big moment, and it's an important one, but there's a consequence, and it could go a number of different ways. And so very much like that, you should feel quickened. You should feel a sense of, am I doing this correctly? Am I doing this with the right intent? And that kind of self-reflection hopefully stays on the reflection side and less on the disability side. But I think it's an important piece that comes along. It's an important piece to getting toward competency, and recognizing that it isn't a place that you'll go from an imposter to okay, now I know. Because ideally this is a journey across time where we're continuing, just as Jake said before, that he's surrounded by clinicians. So while he's not doing his own individual counseling, currently he's got clinicians around him constantly. And so it is, are we willing to lean into that discomfort, be the expert that people expect us to be, and recognize that we are growing in that? So yeah, I think the imposter syndrome is almost a guarantee. And if you're not feeling it in a new thing you're doing, maybe think a little harder, because it probably should be there for a while. Heck, it's the reason I grew a beard in the first place when I was going through the doctoral program. Because I just felt like, man, this kid looks too young. Like, nobody's going to sit with me and take me serious at all. And I don't think that the beard helped at all, but in my mind, it helped to resolve a little bit of the imposter syndrome. And which is part of the thing. Like, if I can own it and then sit with a bit more confidence and a bit more perspective, then I'm kind of moving in that direction. And now I'm just stuck with the beard because kids haven't seen my face for over 10 years. And every time I shave it twice in the last probably 10, 15 years, they freak out and run away. So
Something to play with during sessions.
yeah, exactly. It does the thing, right? And that was exactly it. It was a construct that resonated with, I don't have a couch for people to lay on, but at least I had the beard going on. And so that did help me resolve that little bit of intro anxiety as I started early on in the field.
Brandon, because I know this was your topic, was there a reason this came up, or is it just trying to learn more to help pass off, or like, are you comfortable even sharing like why this was such a big thing for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like I was saying, I was kind of struggling with it myself because, sometimes I just kind of think to myself, am I the best person for this? And I kind of heard a theme when, hearing you guys share your stories. At the end of the day, it's like, am I the right person for this? Am I good enough at this? Did I waste all my time doing this? I love the point DB made about, if you don't have, if you're not doubting yourself a little bit, that's, even a little bit more concerning, because if you think about it as a therapist, the reason at the core we're having these doubts is because we want to help people. And then think about, like DB was also making the, analogy of firearm owners, if you're kind of doubting yourself as, your competence and things like that, especially when you take gun safety into consideration. I mean, the fact that you're questioning yourself and thinking like, am I the right person to be doing this and handling this? That's a good thing.
All I could think was Happy Gilmore, and oh yeah, right. And Grizzly Adams had a beard. Grizzly Adams did have a beard. Sigmund Freud had a beard. And all three of us have beards except for me today, because it's summertime and I shave my beard in the summer. I love the firearms thing because I can identify with that. When I first went to my my very first pistol league, indoor pistol league competition, um, I was nervous, and I got there and everybody's got specialized guns and the flared mag wells, and they're got their cool belts, and I'm there with my little Glock 19 that I've had for no, what do I own? Glock 17. I don't even know what I own anymore. And I'm like, uh, I I I was confident that I could shoot standing still. I was not confident that I could shoot moving around objects. But darn if all the participants there weren't the friendliest people on the planet. They were helpful. Everybody's exchanging ideas. It was very much a community of, hey, let's try to make everybody better. And I liken it to the homebrew community. When I first started homebrewing, that can be really intimidating too. You walk into the homebrew shop and it's a bunch of, old dudes sitting around, talking about recipes. And I'm just like, I don't even know where the grain is. Like, what kind of hops do what? Wait a minute, what do you mean alpha acids versus beta acids? And stuff that gets into the weeds when you've been homebrewing for a really long time, but it can be very intimidating, especially at homebrew competitions. And, what am I doing here? These guys have these big giant setups and, thousands of dollars and, many years invested. And similarly with professions, you can do that too. I very distinctly remember early in my career, shortly after we formed Zephyr Wellness, I got invited to several, well, I sort of inserted myself too, because I wanted to be in the community, but I got invited to a bunch of coalitions and committees and boards and all sorts of things. And I remember sitting in a room, it was the Northern Nevada Behavioral Health Coalition. It's a group of people, not all of whom are practitioners. Some are managers, some are case people, some are just, boots on the ground, social workers doing in-home stuff. So we're all around different agencies talking about this stuff and how we can help Northern Nevada improve. And at one point, I distinctly remember looking around the room thinking, man, I was trained to think that I was really special with my graduate degree in marriage and family therapy, and how nobody's allowed to do what I do and unless they have a license. And I'm surrounded by 25 or 30 people of all different stripes, all different walks of life, all different levels of professional title, different incomes and salaries, and they all contribute positively to this world. And I thought, I do belong here. I have a role to play, and it's not about a hierarchy. It's not about a competition to see who can be the best. And it really dissolved a lot of the introjected beliefs, and that's a Carl Jung term. Introject is an unquestioned belief or an assumption about the way the world works, and a lot of those just dissolved. And I found myself rehearsing in my own head, I do belong. And the fact that I'm wherever I am, whether it's at a pistol league competition or a homebrew club competition, or I'm sitting in a board or a coalition meeting, I belong there, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be there. So I had to reaffirm my own belonging in the group. And I've done that over and over. But to balance with what DB was referencing is the humility to know that you always have more to learn. One of my favorite people on the planet, who's a very good friend of mine, been a mentor for a number of years, and he'll come on at some point too. He's been on the show before, Christian Conti. Um, he'd been big influence in my life. He does this thing where he'll start a presentation by asking everybody in the room to raise their hand if they think they have more to learn, and of course everybody's hand goes up. He goes, well, then if you really think that you Eddie just dropped something in the chat. I'll say it. Uh, uh, he uh, he says, now that you've acknowledged that you have more to learn, it means you don't get to declare an arrival point as though you know everything, right? Because if you do, well, then there's nothing left to learn, and that's a pretty foolish place to be. And that's what DB was talking about. Is like the dangerous clinician is the one who doesn't think he or she has anything else to learn. Eddie says, "Take your shot, everybody." He mentioned Conti. That was a little inside joke that we can't go a podcast without mentioning Christian Conti. Eddie, what were you going to say?
So you kind of already touched the topic, but I was going to talk about how like you actually get past the imposter syndrome, at least the way I did it. And a lot of it was just, the reaffirming. I've definitely been in circles like with the meetings and stuff, sitting down with people that like with the WTTA side of how did I make it here? I was just this grad student that didn't like, yes, like I have this background in shooting, but this grad student that just like all of a sudden I'm sitting in these meetings with these, big name people in the industries and stuff. But when it came down to like working with my clients, a lot of it was trying to remind myself that, hey, I did go through this training. I did do this stuff. I'm not here by like a mistake. I do know what I'm doing. And to reaffirm that also, like, when you're taking care of like your preps for meetings and stuff like that, uh, researching into it. Like the more you learn about a subject, the better you are helping someone. So just kind of reaffirming that like these people would not be coming to you if you were not good at what you did. How I remind myself with my current company is that like the current place I work at, it is one of the premier places to work at if you're in this area. And I remind myself that I would not be employed here if it wasn't for the fact that they thought I was the best for like what I do. So it's
I
just
love
kind of
that.
like reminding of that.
That's right. I love that. And it's a conversation I have regularly with my interns, my students, and about the confidence. It's saying, look, you have the degree, the license, the title, the employment, whatever it is, and people are purposely spending their good hard-earned money to pay you for some feedback. So you better step into that role confidently. And if you don't know, be honest with yourself. Go do some more research, educate yourself, train up in areas of deficiency, and that requires vulnerability, requires the vulnerability and humility to say, I don't know everything. I'm still learning. And hopefully we're all on a journey of lifelong learning and personal insight and awareness. But at the end of the day, if you are or are not married, can you advise couples? If you do or don't have kids, can you help children in a family setting? And so we take it out of the experiential realm and more into the all humans are more or less equal in their capacity to do things. And so you can identify with emotions, you can identify with psychological states, things that are universal across humanity, and join there instead of trying to do experiential comparisons. Because I don't know if anybody knows, but it's four white dudes on the screen. If it was about experiences, we could never counsel people of color because I was never a little black girl growing up. Right? It's like, well, sorry, you didn't have that experience. You can't help her. It's like, no, it's not about that. It's about being able to join commonalities. And I think when we get wrapped around the axle with our lack of experiential touch, in life, then we can really get lost and we can find ourselves self-doubting. And when we're self-doubting, we're not going to be very good for a lot of people. I thought I saw somebody flinch, but maybe it was just me.
But I think we touch on another piece is that the closer you are to to grad school, the more you are connected to the way that you're supposed to formulaically go through these processes. And I think that's part of the imposter syndrome as well, is that like any schooling thing, you have been under an instructor or instructors. And if that's great instruction, then you really want to emulate that. If it's kind of a pathway to getting to the other part, which is probably the case for many of us, probably the case for most fields, where you like maybe your instructors aren't the greatest, maybe they were fantastic, but within the clinical realm, it's I think people know this. This is no secret here, I don't think. And if it is, here's the secret. It's a very ideologically driven field at the moment. It certainly has been becoming more and more so. I know the gun community is well aware of this fact. The military community has long been aware of this fact. And for the clinicians, it's a matter, especially if you're just getting through that process of your education, you still have this kind of bugaboo on your shoulder. Is everything I say going to be held to the light of the perfect video recorded? Can I defend this in 4 different ways based on my supervisor's perspective, not on an objective or was this helpful or good, or was this wise counsel, but would my supervisor have said this? And to the degree that your supervisor is fantastic and all-knowing, well then great. But not all of us are that, and probably none of us are all-knowing. Well, certainly none of us are all-knowing. I think so. There is something to the imposter syndrome that you can move further and further away from a prescripted answer, like the quote unquote right answer, and to an honest answer, to an honest bit of counsel that may be a bit rougher. I find that the longer I've been in practice, the more I sense both the weight of it, although hopefully that begins early as well, but the more I also sense a freedom to be honest and to recognize things faster and to call them faster. Whereas I might have played a more hesitant, I would have absolutely been more hesitant, certainly under direct supervision, of a clinician who I probably never would have sought counsel from, but certainly never would have sought counsel from. But I needed their signature to get through my degree, and that's a weight that we all carry to some degree. So I would say that the imposter syndrome, I guess in that sense, it gets better, or it certainly can. I and my sessions now are far more enjoyable, and I'm far more open in my bios. I'm far more open in that, and people respond heavily to that. Versus, I'm kind of a clinician off the shelf, and you're going to get the same kind of answer that you'd get from anyone. Um, it's a lot more fun.
Right. I think to some degree we all try to emulate the heavy influences in our life until we find out who we are. But letting go of that is very scary. And it means stepping into something that's yet undefined, because you yourself are pretty undefined when you're going through this molding process, right? And that's irrespective of what type of profession. We're always trying to emulate the people who have guided us into whatever we're doing. And that's an impossible goal to achieve because we're just not them. Well, I'll never be Chuck Holt, who is one of the big outsized influences in my life. I'll never be Christian Conti. I'll never be Jill Packman. These are people who have had big influence in my professional life. And then when you step away from that, it almost can suddenly seem like a betrayal of sorts. Like, oh man, I don't need my mentors anymore. It's like, no, that's where you're supposed to be. You're supposed to hone yourself and step confidently into who you are, while maintaining pieces of those people who had great influence, and use them almost as rumble strips on the highway to know that you're not getting too far afield from what you should be doing. Because we do have guidelines, we do have ethics, we do have laws and codes, and we do have evidence-based practices. So, I think this speaks to intentionality. If you have good intentionality behind what you do, it doesn't matter if the CNN cameras are rolling in your office while you're doing your sessions. You can confidently conduct yourself in a way that is articulable upon examination and scrutiny. I regularly say, conduct yourself as though the CNN cameras are rolling. And if anybody asks why you said that certain thing to that 17-year-old, you can say, well, it's because it's based in this, or because I heard in grad school this was a good thing. Like, you could say your intent. Later, maybe you get some information that says, nah, I could have done it a little differently, but that's only after you've acted. So we don't want to freeze ourselves in hesitation based on self-doubt and then fail to act or fail to offer something simply because we don't think we're going to be good enough for the mythical person who's watching us, even though they're not, and they probably don't even know that we're doing what we're doing. Eddie, talk about the internships. You dropped a comment in there.
I mean, I won't mention names, but like in grad school, my internship, well, it's part of the reason I don't know if this was undergrad or grad school, that like I actually, you let me kind of zoom into your clinician staffer meetings to try to get get some better insight and stuff. But like my internships in grad school,
by the way, let me interrupt real quick. Sorry. That I was so proud. That's why I knew that you were cut out for this work, because I was so proud of you for accepting that invitation. We do supervision regularly, and a lot of people can't make it in person because they live elsewhere. And I invited Eddie to partake in our supervision groups from North Carolina. I live in Nevada. He seized that opportunity and jumped on it and participated and brought great wisdom and insights, even though he was a lowly undergrad or didn't have a pre-license, whatever you were, right? But I know you gained information from that, but you also offered information to the people who are in the room from your perspective, and that's why group supervision is so good. But I knew at that point, I was like, this dude's got it. He's willing to go out of his way, tack this extra appointment onto his calendar to jump in and be better, right? That type of effort, I knew that you were going to be elite down the road because your insatiable quest for more knowledge. That was really impressive to me. So I just want to sing your praises there real quick. And that's what I look for in people who are just constantly questing for growth. I love that about you. So please, yes, thanks for letting me interrupt there.
No problem. I had a Rob Zombie line go through my head when you said insatiable lust for his line. Anyways, so like in grad school, my internship, there was a mix-up, and not to throw anyone under the bus, but like the person was supposed to try to find us internships to do her job. So I had to find myself one, and they weren't happy about it, and they denied the one that I found, and they stuck me in just like a community partnership place, and I didn't learn a thing. I was there basically basically filing paperwork. I think I saw maybe 2 clients the entire time I was there for like a year and a half. And so like I didn't learn a single thing in grad school. So when I finally got out, I'm sitting there like, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this, and just like terrified beyond terrified of that. Hence the imposter syndrome of like, what am I doing? How am I here? And luckily, what really kind of jump started my career is that I did not accept the in-house supervision that the company I first started with, mostly because I didn't want to sign a 5-year contract. I accepted an outside supervision, and that she was integral, and she still is. Once she did the introduction to the company I'm still at, after she gained some trust in me, and I realized that I was doing good. But like she was able to help craft me, and she encouraged me, kind of like what Dr. Palmer was saying, just the be yourself. She's a professor at the local college, and she even told me that half the stuff we learn in college is just CYA. She says, be yourself, just uh, find your own style and run with it. There's nothing wrong with taking all the book knowledge you have and throwing it out the window and finding your own step, as long as it's grounded in actual theory and it's doing good.
Great points. Because I think it's something that inspires us to go reach for more. I tell students all the time that what they're learning in school is foundational principles, but where you really grow is after school, when you're on your own. And that's the time to consume as much content as possible, because only after doing so will you find out who you are. When you've played with a few things. Existentialism, I love it. I think it's cool. It's just not me. It's not a fit, right? I would never tell anybody not to go into the existential realm, because that may be a good fit for them. But that's what school is for. It's to expose you to a bunch of different concepts and a bunch of different thought patterns. But then we come out and we're so deconstructed that we often fail to reconstruct ourselves, because we're stuck in an imposter syndrome. It's like, well, I don't know if I should grab that because I was told that it has limitations. I don't know if I should grab that because I was told it has limitations. Like, well, yeah, well, now welcome to integration, right? So you take the best parts of everything and apply them. Brandon,
You
I
have
want
the
to.
test.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
and Eddie's not a good test taker, and we know
No, no,
that.
like, but the test is like they're based on book knowledge, not real life knowledge, and you have to try to remember the school knowledge based on that, and oh man, it goes nuts.
It's so artificial. Sorry, I was going somewhere and I can't remember what.
You
I know I
said
called him
Brandon.
Brandon. I did say Brandon, but now it's early for me.
That was
Brandon,
a segment.
bail
And
me out.
Brandon.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, what it's like, you said 7 or 8 over there right now?
It's 8:03
Eight,
by
yeah.
my clock.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, we got a little extra sleep so far over here on the East Coast. Yeah, no, I'm kind of back, just kind of jumping off of what Eddie was saying there. I mean, I remember when I was in my practicum, which was essentially you're not in for people that don't know what that is, you're not an internship yet, but it's like a pre-internship type of place. We were recorded, and we had like supervisors come in and, they had to critique us, things like that. So pretty common in the counseling world. But I found myself just, always so nervous, because I'm just, instead of being able to focus on my client, I'm thinking like, okay, like, am I asking enough open-ended questions? Am I using reflection skills? Am I reflecting meaning? Am I doing all these things? And, I just kind of built up all this anxiety, just kind of thinking like, I have to do this, I have to do this. But then once I actually got into my internship and I didn't have these cameras on me, and I was able to actually be myself and be a human and have conversations with people, it was like, okay, this is what this is supposed to look like. I've got these skills that I've learned. I don't have to be a robot, but I can put my personality in them and use what I learned to, help these people.
Let me ask this of you guys. I'm curious how you do it. I know how I do it, or at least I know how I do it now. But back in the day, early in my career, I would get stuck, right? And I'd be in session doing very much what Brandon just shared, which is being in my own head, trying to figure out all the angles instead of just simply being present. But what do you guys do now when the conversation kind of lulls in session and you're patient? I call it, for the listening audience, I call them patients, because the root word of patient, pati, is to suffer. It's from Latin. And then patient is the one who suffers. So I like to see myself as guiding people through their suffering to healing. Client, to me, has too much of a business transactional I guess, definition to it. I know why we moved away from patient to client in our world, because we didn't want to medicalize people. We wanted it to be more relational. But now I think the pendulum has swung too far, and we've fallen so far away from the medical umbrella that it's almost like our profession isn't taken seriously enough. And I would like to get back to being more aligned with the medical profession, at least insofar as we can advocate for better reimbursement rates for the services we provide. But I'm curious, if you're in session with a patient or a client, and conversation falls dead, and you're a little adrift and you don't have direction anymore, what do you guys do in that moment? Because that can be very unnerving, and it can be very disorienting, and it can also start to ping some of that self-doubt. What are your techniques in those moments?
I'll jump in real quick. So I started in the field from the adventure therapy side, or wilderness therapy side, as it was called back then. So basically multiple day trips to weeks upon weeks in the backcountry before I got formally into my grad school. So my intro into really big C counseling and big letter P psychology was really coming from the group side, movement based, and engaging it in that way. And so so there's naturally a lot more pause. There was a lot more time in between conversations, and there wasn't a compressed need that, okay, in 45 minutes or 53 minutes, we're going to get through this block of time, and I need to run it, to this amount of time. Because ultimately I'd hit the 53 minutes eventually, and then keep going for the next, 7 weeks or something. So that changed a bit of the process. But then for me, in terms of being comfortable, well, the important part, being comfortable with silence. If you can imagine sitting around a campfire, there's a lot of silence in that. There's a lot less compressed need to have that conversation. Or sitting in a car, having a great conversation. We tend to have these really good conversations in a car, or by a campfire, sitting by a river, because there's this third thing, there's an other thing, and we just happen to be attending together. So I'll often bring something like that into the session when that occurs, and say, hey, what? I'll mention it directly. Like, sometimes we're going to have these odd moments, and I'm really, really comfortable with silence. And I recognize that most people aren't. And we're really trained socially to not be comfortable with silence. We have all kinds of sayings, all kinds of things, awkward, or this 7-minute silence, or all these things that we've used to self-soothe around these moments, or to call it out. And I just like to mention, I'm actually really comfortable with it right now. And so I recognize that you may not be, but I find that this can be a really important time. So I'll press this a little bit, usually not on purpose, but when it happens, I'll be a little slower to just fill the space. So as long as you know that about me, that might help the dynamic. So I try to be really honest about it. Really, the first time I noticed that, we've just done that thing.
EB, how long do you let it go? Because this is actually a good question I have, because I run into this sometimes with my teenagers. Some of them want to talk. Some of them are glad to talk. Some of them, like, they don't want to be here because they're forced to be here, and they don't want to deal with me, and so they would rather cuss me out than do anything. And like, most of them don't cuss me out because they know then they go, like, it has to get reported to their, like, verbal abuse to a counselor, blah blah, all that crap. But how long do you let it go? I don't mind sitting in silence, but at a certain point, like, hey, they haven't talked in 15 minutes, and it's unethical to bill for, like, just sitting here.
So interesting, because I was thinking the first thing, as you said, how long to let it go? My first thought was, depends on who and why. And I was thinking, because I can think of teenager experiences. So most of us, start, community health agencies of various stripes as we get into the field, and so a lot of that would be working with youth, because there's such a need there, right? And so that was my go-to spot. Was, okay, what about the teenager example? Because the silence is not something as a ditching responsibility. It's more that we're recognizing this is just a moment of pause. So who and why becomes really important. To your example, so who, teenager, why, maybe just to stonewall you and wait out the time. That's an interesting question, and it's going to depend on that teenager. Like, what kind of rapport do I already have? What's the hook that they have coming into this thing? There are some, if anybody is forced to come sit with me, like, I got no chips, or very, very few chips to play. in that relationship, and I gotta I gotta deal with that. At the same time, I'm also not going to look to be their puppet or do some little dance for somebody just because they have to sit with me. So I tend with teenagers or with anybody who's in a position that they really don't want to see me, but they are anyway. Yeah, I'm a lot more. Well, I'm not looking to try to make something fancy or fun. I'm just looking to like recognize, I get you don't want to be here. My role usually in this is to be like a help in these conversations, and so I'll be a bit more honest about that part. That I'm not looking to force you to talk. I'm not looking to force you to agree with me. I'm also not looking to just sit here and bide out the time. So that's going to come down to your agency. It's going to come down to what kind of requirements you've got. But I'm way, there's a lot of people who would like to come in and get counseling. There's a lot of people who are on wait lists. And, if a person's not looking to see me, I'm not really looking to hold that time for them. And I know in an agency setting, that's a different burden. And I'm super glad to not be there anymore.
The one that I found interesting, I'm glad this actual topic brought up. I have a 15-year-old female client that she came to me, she requested therapy based on some stuff that happened this past year. And in sessions, doesn't want to talk, but requested to get therapy, requested the help. And it kind of like stonewalls. And that one I always found interesting that like, I have my strategies I'm working. I'm not asking for the help. I just find it interesting that when they request the help, they still want to stonewall you in the session. And I get it in the beginning. It's like you're having to coax stuff out of them. It's just always interesting because I've seen this with other individuals as well. That like if they ask for it, then when the session time is, they don't want to talk. And I'm sure we've all experienced that at least at some level. It's just I always find it interesting that this happens a lot to in clients.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, even in that could be for a range of reasons, right? It could be legit stonewalling, straight up. Person could be just looking to get out of something else and say that they're doing therapy and seeing somebody, and then who knows what they say about that. Could well be that this person's also that she's looking just for a safe spot for this amount of time, that she's looking for somebody that she at least can reasonably trust, and just to hold some space. I guess that'd be the other thing. Maybe jump into Jake was talking about the existential piece. That's really for me a really strong driver is like, why are we here and what's meaningful and what's the what is our purpose and how do we construct these things? Maybe the case is for her is just kind of holding some space. And so I know you're not looking for this because you're actually sitting with her. So I think it's important that none of us really, especially in the listening audience, that we don't jump to, well, it must be this one thing. There's so many variables in that. And I think that may be a strong driver, certainly a driver for the imposter side, because man, people are really, really unique. Of course, we've got a lot of similarities, and we tend to think, we know what's best for other people until you actually have some of that mantle of applying that into life. And so, yeah, Eddie, I'd just say, man, I'm sure you're doing great work there, and so much of it is just going to be building that relationship. That's far more important. Your rapport, a clinician's rapport with their patient client, with the other human that's sitting with them, is far more important, the research would say, than our modality or our evidence-based practice. That the evidence would back that the counselor believing that the client or patient is going to improve and really can, that there's your evidence-based model, and shows the highest outcomes.
Brandon, do you still?
Oh, go ahead.
Brandon, do you still work with the police department? Was that not you, or is that,
Oh, no, that
someone
wasn't
else? Okay, I was gonna hear how you work with it. No, first responders. Jake, do you know what I'm talking about then?
I do, yeah, and I have done some work with law enforcement and also other professionals who are worried that what they're working on will get back to command staff and they'll be, deemed unfit for duty or whatever. Certainly physicians, especially emergency medicine physicians, pilots, firefighters, and that has to do with job relevance, particularly when the command staff believes that they're not capable of performing their duties, right? But then there's the softer side where there's an implied cultural pressure that if you're somehow, if you're seeking counseling, then you're somehow weak and you get judged as being weak for that. So, the tough guy jobs out there, often that is an inhibition to people being fully honest. And I think sometimes silence is because they don't want it. They're scared. They don't want to share. Sometimes silence is because they don't know. And that's fine too. And we can help explore that. To DB's point about building rapport, I've found that a really good way to build rapport is to teach. If you could teach somebody something, they'll want to come back. And so in those moments where you got the recalcitrant teenager who doesn't want to open up for whatever reason, I just fill the space with teaching, usually, for a while. And I'll just teach stuff. And usually that brings out of them some curiosity to want to learn more. And then they start talking. That's pretty effective. But I never really considered I guess the pressure, the limitations of session. Like we all feel the pressure of having to perform, right? At least insofar as documentation, when you have to write your note and say, what did you do? Well, I played with a kid. Oh, geez, is insurance going to kick the claim back? It's right in there. No, building rapport. Sometimes rapport building, especially with traumatized children, can last a long time. So I'm completely comfortable with people documenting, continued working on rapport, did the following activities, continued working on rapport, did the following activities for weeks on end, depending on the acuity of the presentation and how tough they are, right? So I'm fine with that. We have to get out of our own heads to be comfortable in that silence. Not that you're not doing, quote unquote, something like Eddie, you mentioned earlier, because it's unethical to bill insurance for not doing anything. But if you can actively use that silence for something like rapport building, then that's fine. The person doesn't have to talk. I can stand up there on the whiteboard and teach concepts all day long. But we also have to acknowledge stages of change. And I don't want to get into stages of change now, because similarly to our listening audience, I want to entice you back to learn more. So we'll talk about stages of change maybe next time. But that's an important acknowledgement too. Maybe this person's just not in a spot where they're ready. They want to. I'll never question somebody's desire. I fundamentally believe that people want to change. They want to improve. So this whole thing, I've worked at agencies where they say things like, hey, he just doesn't want it enough. Like, nah, I don't know about that. I'm never going to challenge that. They may not be ready. That's very different than wanting it. So I'll presume desire, and then it's my job to be creative enough to meet them where they are in a way that's engaging and gets them to keep coming back before we start asking the why questions that are a little more vulnerable and intimidating. So what I was going to say was that I spent my early years before I was in grad school and before I was licensed working in home with children, and a lot of them with very, 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 very tough backgrounds, a lot of violence and abuse and neglect and so forth. And somebody told me once, and it really resonated, and I've carried this with me, that simply being in the presence of a healthy person can itself be healing. And so if you can just model that, talk about your own life, talk about your struggles, we don't over disclose, make it all about us, but sharing our own stories can certainly build rapport as well, because then it doesn't make us look like we're some faultless, flawless person trying to infuse advice into this kid's life. We just be present with them and be healthy and be honest. And that in and of itself can model for them that healing is possible. And they see that sometimes they've never seen something like that. If their worlds are full of chaos and turbulence, just being a calming presence is enough. And you can just sit with them.
I like to share with a lot of my teenage clients, especially because a lot of them struggle with behaviors in school and like what are they gonna do afterwards. I struggled that in high school. I now know it as depression. My senior year, I just didn't go to school for 2.5 weeks, and I almost flunked out of high school. And then I barely graduated from that. My grades weren't the best, and then I went to college and I got 4 Fs, and I flunked out of college my first time. And then so that I had to pivot and find a different career because my whole plan growing up was to go in the military. I have ADHD, and that disqualified me back in the day. Now there's ways around it, but when I graduated high school, there was no way around it. You have ADHD, you're not going in if you're on medication. So now, but I always also like to share, okay, this is the job I have now. When I went back to college, I had a 4.0 GPA all through college because I was not ready at the time to do this like academic style of learning. And I barely got through high school, not because I was unintelligent, just because I was not ready to do this and I was not in the headspace to do this thing. So just because you're struggling does not mean is a sign of unintelligence, does not mean you're a sign of you're going to be a failure. Who just knows? Like maybe this just like you're not, this isn't for you right now. Like there's plenty of opportunities out there that we can do things, we can help you along the path. And also I do kind of like to normalize myself, because a lot of the times these kids where I see they're thrown to all these like professionals, and one, they don't get a choice because they're forced to be there. Half my clients are forced to be there. And two, like they all see these people that quote unquote have their life together. Like it's more normalizing. That's why like I don't dress up. Most of my clothing every day is in the summertime. It's shorts and a t-shirt or a button up or something like that. But I do not show up to sessions in like, a suit or anything like that. And I do that intentionally because I don't want to come off as like this person who's better than this person. I want to normalize myself to them.
I was taught in grad school that we should always dress one step above the client. And I thought,
Yeah, that's
how
bullshit.
ridiculous is that? How ridiculous is that? First of all, it presumes that I know what they're going to be wearing. Secondly, I'm now not authentic. I'm being artificial. And people can detect that through mirror neurons very easily when we're being fake. So I love that approach. Now, you want to balance the line between being unprofessional, right? And with your attire in an office setting, shorts in the summertime is probably perfectly fine, maybe a polo shirt, because you also want to communicate a sense of confidence and professionalism. But we don't need ties. We don't need slacks and shiny shoes. That's absurd. That separates us from them. And that's, I think, part of what we get taught in grad school is that there is a separation between us and quote unquote them. And it's like, how dehumanizing is that? How much more are we contributing to the stigma when we do things like that? It's like, oh, I'm separated from you. I don't live in your community. Yeah, you do. Like I'm gonna see you in the grocery store, and I wanna have community with you down the road when you're well, and I want my kids to play baseball with your kids. Like, we got to get out of that mindset. Sounds like I'm
what's it
bagging
like
on the
having
profession. Maybe I am.
Jake, what's it like having an office? My office is out in the community.
Well, so next time you go to, a chiropractor, next time you go to any kind of other professional, notice the conversation, notice the engagement. You catch that person in the grocery store, and it's not a stressful dynamic because there's not this weird stigma of I need to somehow live, on another planet. You go to the I was at the chiropractor yesterday. Still ouch on that, but but you go to that conversation with Dr. So and so there, and he's talking about golf. He's talking about what he's doing. He's talking about his adventure race that he's coming up to, and it's just life. It's two people sitting in a room together. One's practicing their trade. The other is being practiced on, getting a thing done, a service done for them. And then if I see him at the grocery store, I can absolutely say, or he may in fact say, hey, you're in this next week. Within a clinician, we would be like, oh, the horror, we have just broken some confidentiality law. But by seeing each other, I need to have a script, and we're all trained at this. Have a script. If I see you in the grocery store, I won't approach you first. If you feel free if you want to just talk to me, I'll respond in kind, but I will never approach. Like, oh my goodness, like what?
You guys we all went to different schools, and we all got the same script.
I had
That is so dumb.
I had a professor say that if you see one of your clients in
Run.
the store, you have to stop what you're doing and leave. I pushed back against it even then, and man, I'm pretty sure I was not popular for that. In fact, there's a story like they thought I was the crazy gun guy in school.
Yeah,
I was actually told to avoid eye contact.
Really? Oh my god.
Yeah,
I have a feeling that
which I thought was really funny because. Oh, go ahead.
No, yeah, go ahead.
No, just get that. So I thought that was hilarious because there's so many times I see complete strangers. If I make eye contact, I'll like smile and nod to them. So it's like if I see my client, I'm not just going to be a jerk and just look the opposite direction.
I wonder why people don't want to get counseling. Maybe that's why. Maybe we're the ones creating a stigma. Did we ever think of that? It's like we're not the only people on the planet who hold confidential private information in our heads. You know what I mean? Like my financial advisor doesn't do that with me. My attorneys don't do that with me. My dentist doesn't do that with me. Like we're all normal human beings running normal human life. What they don't do is my dentist doesn't ask me about my cavity when I'm picking up my kids from school, because our kids go to school together. He doesn't do that. That would be a breach of confidentiality. It's not to say, hi, Jake. Oh, no. How do you know that person? I don't know. We live in Reno and everybody knows everybody. Like, it's
I'm
just,
excited. I'm excited when I see some of my kids in public because like a lot of times they want to share good things. Like a lot of my kids out here, this is in the springtime is when the FFA they all do their animal shows and competitions like that. Man, I'm just always excited to see them because they come up to me, Eddie, I got to go to States, I did this, or Eddie, I got a new cow. It's like they're excited to share something positive about them because there's an adult in their life that finds this positive thing attribute about them absolutely fascinating, and they just want to brag about themselves, or maybe they don't get a chance to do that, and they don't want to wait till next week to do it.
agreed. And there's so many things we could just bash right now, and we will at some point. One I want to touch on too,
Send me in, coach. I'm ready.
If there are other clinicians listening, and you're rolling through these thoughts in your own mind, I was legitimately told so many things that were ethical breaches that are just foolish. Things like business cards are solicitation and you shouldn't do that. I'm like, what? If you can go, yeah, if you go on, don't ever go on social media, because anything you post could be conceived as treatment without consent and you can be sued. And it's like there's all these lawsuits lurking around every corner. It's like, that's fundamentally untrue, because if it were, our liability insurance would be much higher than it is. Right now it's like a couple $100 a year. It's because nobody sues us. It's just bonkers to me. I was told that I can't go on radio shows, I shouldn't have a podcast, definitely no YouTube, because it can be treatment without consent. I'm like, aren't you the guy who wrote a book? Wouldn't writing a book count as something similar? And it turns out, I think all it is that a lot of times our professors and our supervisors are so locked in their old paradigm that they're suspicious, they're overly rigid. And I get that grad school has to teach you to be overly rigid, because later down the road you learn how to push back against the overly rigid boundaries and restrictions so that you can find your own comfort zone. We don't want people leaving graduate school being haphazard and cavalier with the rules, for sure. I get that. But the problem is, into license world, whether you're supervised or unsupervised as a licensee, these tropes still persist. And it blows my mind that there's grown people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who've been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years who still embrace that and still poo-poo things like social media and YouTube. And it's like, do you or don't you actually want to help people in the biggest way possible? It's like, well, I don't know, that threatens my profession. And what if they all get well? Oh, come on, really? You're going to tell me that you don't want to live in a world where everybody's well? Let go of this identity as clinician thing, or clinician as identity thing. It's like, that's not your identity. It's just a job you do.
Would much rather work
crazy.
in the I'd much rather work in the firearm industry than do what I'm doing now. But the firearm industry doesn't actually help me. That's probably the wrong thing to say, but like actually working inside that doesn't actually like better my own community. It just helps make sales and stuff like that. And I have the connections, I can do it, but it doesn't help the kids in my community.
That's exactly it. And I've repeatedly said I'd be so much better in business if I were selling products instead of services, especially services where I'm basically handcuffed to contracts and I can't just pass along cost increases to my customers like I can in, if I'm selling t-shirts or something. And I would be so much better at that. But it's not about making money. If it were, I'd just go into sales. I'd go work for Cintas and sell uniforms and cleaning products, and I'd make way more money. But that doesn't help the people around me. And I don't like living in an ailing world where I'm seeing couples fighting in the grocery store and my kids getting sand thrown in their eyes at the playground. So I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do. It's also a calling, and I don't know, not everybody's called to it, but it just blows my mind that as professionals we would stomp on each other's best efforts to bring help and healing. I think part of it's jealousy maybe, but I don't know. It's just weird to me. So if you're listening to this and you're having the same doubts, like, oh, maybe I'd really like to start a podcast, but my professor's voice is chirping in my ear telling me I shouldn't. Like, shake that off, man. Do what you're called to do, and do it with intentionality.
Well, every theoretical book we read was written by somebody who had read and studied the other theories and thought, well, I think there's something else here. I'm going to take it the next step. And so every book that we read was somebody doing the opposite of what their faculty had told them to do. Maybe not the opposite. They're going beyond what their faculty had said to do. That's why we're studying them now. That's why they exist. It's because they studied, they were a student of the craft, and then they took it further. And that's exactly what we're presenting here, is that know your field, study it, get to know it, study under others, get counsel, but don't stop there. Keep moving forward. And that's the trick. I've got a reasonable suspicion that probably all four of us were in the dean's office probably at least once throughout our grad programs, and it would seem that that's probably that for me. That's the clinician that I want, is somebody who was pushing the boundary, not to be problematic, but who was really trying to ask those questions. And that's exactly what I'm hearing from Eddie in this, is that like this, the why is really important. And if the why that a person can give is salient and is powerful, then I can accept that. Like, got it, I wasn't aware, and that makes sense to me now. But if you can't defend your why, you should expect me to ask it. And I think that's probably what makes it. Yeah, and if we're talking about teens or adolescents, we all recognize it, or at least the cliches, of course, that teens get that. I think that's pretty true. That's the period of life where we're supposed to be pushing back, asking deep and important questions. And the trouble with that is that most of us as adults didn't keep looking to find out why. We just kind of sit back into some kind of thing that we're comfortable with. And well, the adolescent years are about pushing beyond that.
Yeah, because asking why is uncomfortable, and most of us fall into our own little like our own road, and it's quite normal, because once we've established ourselves, it's easy just to go along with the flow, and you can call it the sheep mentality if you want to go straight, get onto that route. But really what it is something, when you're ingrained in something, why do you want to buck the industry? It's easy, I know what I'm doing, I don't have to push myself. And to push yourself means you have to get uncomfortable, and most of us don't want to get uncomfortable when we're an adult, because we're proving we don't actually know something, or we're having to learn something new.
It takes effort and energy too, right? And when you settle in, you become fat, dumb, and happy in your routine, ego takes over. And if your ego takes over to the point that you're no longer growing or pushing the envelope, then what happens is you suppress your true self. And then you risk becoming inauthentic and overly rigid in your own beliefs. And then you start to impart those beliefs on others, not because they're the best, but because you can't stand other people doing things differently, because it doesn't match what your own comfort zone is. So it's unfortunate that this pervades a profession like ours that allegedly hangs its hat on lifelong learning and non-judgmentalism and ego dissolution. We're trying to do it for other people, but we won't model it ourselves. It sucks, honestly. So again, to the clinicians who are listening, please be bold, step out, make yourselves known. There's a very large demographic in the marketplace, I believe, that is woefully unserved by our profession, because they see us doing these things and they pick up on it, and they don't want to come in and get help from us, because they don't want to be judged. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be told how to live their lives. And unfortunately, and I'm not going to get into it right now. This will be for another podcast, but we've got activism being actively taught in grad schools, where therapists aren't supposed to be therapists anymore. They're supposed to be activists for, social justice or whatever adjective justice. Yeah. Well, we've gone, a little over an hour now, and I think this is a pretty robust introduction to what people can expect. What I'd like to do is go around real quick and do some takeaways, because this is it's a cool way of, I guess, summarizing what we learned today, or what jumped out at us. And I steal it from Christian Conte, so there's another Conte reference, but it's called
three shots if you're keeping track. That's three shots.
Yeah. Not this early in the morning. I'm not in my 20s anymore, and this isn't a tailgater. But a therapeutic summary is really good, and it's a great way to end conversations, because it gives a reflection on what was important to the person you're working with. If it's in our profession, it's the client or the patient, what jumped out at them, what really resonated with them. And also it gives us an idea about where to go next time. So I'd like to model this for people who are listening. start with DB. What is your takeaway today from this conversation?
Yeah, I think I was pondering that there is a tremendous reward when we take risks, and of course, there's a risk when we take risks, and that there is a very dangerous spot when we pursue safety. So that conversation, we get kind of complacent, or not complacent, we get comfortable, and we don't want to push against the system. That's such a dangerous place for our souls moving forward. It's profitable. I get that if we just pursue safety, but to what end? And so we just don't grow from a position of safety. We all recognize this within kind of desensitization or any number of things that we do our entire life, particularly from birth through getting into adulthood is about risking one more step forward. And the less we do that, the less capable we are and the less we grow. And we get to some point as clinicians, as professionals, where we just are averse to that because it has risk. But that's exactly what we're called to. That's what life is. And so we won't comment on the last, I will just briefly, on the last 3 years, but life is risky. And we lean into that risk, hopefully from a sense of what is the consequence? How am I going to mitigate those risks? I'm not going to be stupid and jump off cliffs unless I've actually got the training and I've done a number of things. That'd be my takeaway, is that we each will be better, not just as clinicians, but as people, all of us as people. The more we take a level sense, the best we can, of the risks that we think we face, how are we going to mitigate those? And if we don't think that we've quite got it, what kind of counsel can we seek out? If I'm not willing to do the plumbing in my house, which is generally a bad idea for me, I bring in a professional for that. I've run the numbers and it tends to not go well. So I'm going to bring in a pro for that. And other things, yeah, I can, like Jake, you mentioned fences. Yeah, I do my own fences here. That means I'll probably be redoing some of them in 6 months. But I got to do something this weekend. So I'm gonna install that pig fence yet again, and we'll see what they do this next time. Those Berkshire hogs are, they've got my number. I think they know where they're destined, and they resent me for it.
You're gonna shoot up to DB's place. It sounds like a great place. Any developmental theorist will tell you that in order to grow, you have to get into disequilibrium. If you're in equilibrium, you cannot grow. So that goes for seeds coming from the ground, or spiritual growth, or psychological growth, emotional growth. In order to grow, you have to be pushed into disequilibrium. Disequilibrium is uncomfortable. And if you're not good with discomfort, you're not going to invite that, and you won't grow. And, like I said, it's probably profitable to stay there. But, quote the famous Snoop Dogg, if I don't move, I can't lose. But you know me, dog, I'm moving. Eddie, what are you taking away?
Give me a second. That was like, to pair it off what DB said. The first off, I appreciate everything he said there of that, that to grow is like, I like to be tongue in cheek about it a lot. Like I like to say to my friends, I like to spread hate and discontent. And it's not so much that I like to do that. It's just I butt the system a lot, and that's pretty much how I am. Like whenever I meet a new client, so I always tell them no matter how you take your feedback, mine's direct. And it's not so much that I can't take it and soften the blow, because I will do that. I'm not just gonna come up and say, hey, you're being a jerk. But if you are being a jerk and you ask if you're being a jerk, I'm going to tell you that what you did, you're being a jerk in that moment. So with me, when it comes to a lot of things, if I don't see a good reason for something happening, I'm going to question it. I'm going to push against it. I'm going to buck up against the system. Hence the whole I like to spread hate and discontent. And that goes along with growing as a person. And I've definitely had to grow and learn how to soften that blow coming from the world of first responding and EMS. I learned a very good skill of telling a doctor how to go F themselves without actually saying that. And you shouldn't really do that to your supervisors in mental health world. It is fun to do it. It doesn't make you friends. But in that, I've learned how to soften the blows, and I've learned how, but at the same time, I also challenge my clients and everyone, don't just accept what I'm giving to you. If you want to challenge me, challenge me. You're not going to make me upset, and challenge what you're being told. Because if you challenge it and you look into it yourself, and then it resonates with you, then it's the right information. But if you don't challenge it and someone's just feeding you fluff, you don't know actually how you're going to grow. So always look to grow.
Stuff. Brandon, what's one thing you're taking away from today?
Sure, I'd say I had two main takeaways. One, we were talking about taking risks. Me being a musician, I kind of went to a music, kind of a music analogy. So if you think when music, early on, we had like Gregorian chant, where there was really no instrumental accompaniment, and there were all these rules, like, there were certain intervals or certain, chords you couldn't pair together. But eventually there were composers that started to push the envelope. So you had the composers that blossomed the Renaissance era. From there it was the Baroque. From there, classical, romantic, to we have the modern classical, and then all the other genres of music we have now. But all of that came from composers taking risks and really pushing outside, outside the box. So I'd say just to just kind of like to tie that analogy forward here, just like as clinicians that are listening to this, just really don't be afraid to take risks. Don't be afraid to make those changes. And going back to the imposter syndrome that we were talking about, I think that the biggest thing to do is question yourself, and being able to ask yourself those questions, being able to normalize that imposter syndrome or that insecurity. And typically at the root of it, I guess my big takeaway for today is that we feel this way because we want to help.
It's really good. I like that the music genres and their evolution in order chronologically. That was kind of cool. And as my old band teacher used to say, if it ain't Baroque, don't fix it.
That's right.
My takeaway
Ooh,
is that
ouch.
I think we're really onto something here. This was a fun conversation. It didn't feel like a podcast. It felt like a conversation among peer colleagues, which is, I think, the point. Um, we're chatting and you can't see that, but I'm going to share it. Eddie says we hit the best genre ever of symphonic black metal. Brand says love me some Dark Funeral and Emperor. We should do a psychological examination of music styles. That would be really cool. But for me, I'm really excited for what we're doing. I'm very excited to bring some guests on, and hopefully people ping us and email us with their inquiries and insights and reflections, and also just questions, because I think we're going to continue helping people as we push more information into the public. We get out, this stuff doesn't do any good locked up in our heads, right? So the more people who can learn this stuff and apply it in their own worlds, I think the better off we're all going to be. So I'm excited, and I'm proud to be affiliated with you guys. You're all very brilliant in your own ways, and I know you're going to help me grow, and I'm looking forward to that too. So I really appreciate it. So on behalf of our Walk the Talk family and the Zephyr Wellness family, Adventure Therapy, and all the people that support us along the way, thanks. Share this around. As they say in the subscription world, smash that subscribe button, click the little bell so you get the notifications, and give us a rating and review and all those things. So thanks, everybody. And in the meantime, we wish you great mental wellness. Bye-bye.
Next time with more branded